Next up, we've got Hellcat. It's a little indie horror movie directed by Brock Bodell, starring Dakota Gorman. She's awesome in this movie, really good, playing Lena, and then Clive, played by Todd Terry. Now, these aren't the only actors in the movie, but they're the main two actors. It really is coming down between those two for almost the whole movie. Now, this is a movie that is almost awesome. It's still good. I will still recommend this movie. But for horror fans, I think your mileage might vary a little bit on this movie. Basic concept, I mentioned intensity to Eric because he loves that miniseries. It was a two-part miniseries from the 80s, I want to say, maybe 90s. Stephen King, or I don't remember if it was a Stephen King adaptation. It might have been Straub. Either way, doesn't matter. It had to do with a killer and had somebody trapped in a motorhome and they were going around and things were happening. It was very intense. This movie starts with a similar premise. It starts out and Lena wakes up and she doesn't know where she is and we're with her. Very isolated, like almost a single setting movie, very limited settings in this movie. And she is in the back of one of those Silverstream trailers. She's in the back of it. It's rattling around. It's on the road. It's driving. She's there. She's obviously been drugged or captive or, well, you don't know what's going on. She doesn't know what's going on. She's freaking out. She's trying to get up and get around there and figure out how to get out or where she is and where she's going and how can she escape and who's got her and that stuff. But basically, I'm held captive by probably a serial killer or at least a killer or some kind of a situation. And a great setup, right? Great basic setup for a thriller / horror movie. And that's your first third of this movie. Now, I'll say it does make some twists. And I will, at the very end of this review, give you a couple of the twists because I think I would say I will give you a recommendation for or against this movie before that. So you can just ignore the spoilers if you need to. But I'll just say that first third, tense, really streamlined. Basically, the driver has wired a camera and a microphone so he can hear her and he can talk to her while he's driving. So there's scenes where he's got these mounted wolf head or coyote head or something up on the wall with there's a bunch of other stuff, like an old school trailer, but he's got that mounted on the wall. So there's a lot of times where personifying him, you get the taxidermized coyote wolf head up on the wall that she's talking to, because it makes it easier than her just talking at the walls. It gives us somebody to look at because we don't see him until later in the movie. Now, there is a reveal, and once again, in spoilers, I will get into that a little bit. There is a reveal in this movie that I did see coming, and to me, it makes the movie a little less interesting. I know it's ambitious, but I wish it hadn't been ambitious. I wish this movie had stayed in the lane that it started in, although I say what it does do interesting stuff with the premise it turns into. But it's not as good as it could have been, in my opinion. Now, some people they might be like, oh, this is okay. It's just a thriller of a person stuck in this thing and it's a killer and how's she going to get out, that thing. But I think personally, I would have liked that a little bit better. But either way, that's a personal taste thing. And it is done really well. And there's a lot of style here for the limited storytelling and obviously probably a limited budget. You just get mostly this interior with a few exterior shots, but mostly this interior and a woman and an ever-growing mystery being uncovered as she tries to investigate the cell. Essentially, it's a traveling cell that she's in, and mysteries in that cell start to uncover. She finds things. She finds I'm just going to say a locked door, and there might be something or someone behind that locked door, and that's a whole part of the story, and why is that there and what's happening there, and it's freaking her out, of course. And then, of course, as the conversation goes back and forth with the person who's driving, you get a lot more story between the two, between Lena and what's his name again, Clive, as well. There's also a really great touch here. At some point, you eventually discover Clive, once again, not a spoiler this part, Clive loves to listen to one of those coast-to-coast AM sort of shows, where you can almost the image of him being almost like a long-haul trucker. He's not, because this is not a big rig, but that same idea. You're driving at night and you're listening to coast-to-coast AM, and they're talking about aliens and Bigfoot and whatever, all these crazy things, and people are calling in and giving their testimonials. And that adds a whole neat little, almost like a campfire story element to this one as well. This is a movie I thought probably in the first, like I said, third to half, I felt like, wow, this is going to be such a cool hidden gem. This is going to be a real undiscovered treat. And I think to some degree it still is. To some people, it might be fully that. But like I said, the second half falls off a little bit for me. So something I thought might be 4.5 stars for me drops to 3.5 stars. Still recommend it. Still had a good time with it. Like I said, great central performances, especially from Dakota Gorman as the lead in here. She really gives it her all. And for a little movie like this, a lot of times it either has to live and die on either a whole bunch of cool set pieces and special effects, and this doesn't have a ton of that, or it has to live and die on performances. And a lot of times in a little independent movie, you're going to get okay performances to not great performances. You're not having a huge array of actors to choose from. But here, I think they did a really great job of casting some very, very great performances and great actors for such a small movie. So once again, I would go 3.5 stars for... I didn't mention, it takes place mostly in, was it Kentucky and Tennessee? I think it mentions here. Not too far from where I'm at. I know they're heading to basically Dollywood, but they have to give it another name because that's a trademarked, copyrighted thing. So they call it Gollywood or whatever, but it's basically Dollywood. They're on their way there, and there's a reason they're going there too. Okay, really quick, I'm going to get into a couple spoilers. You could have already hopefully decided if you're going to watch the movie or not, so you don't have to listen to these. Or if maybe you're coming back to this a few months later or a few weeks later and you watched it and you just wanted to listen to the spoiler stuff, I'm not going to really go in a big discussion of it, other than to say, to me, the drawback was I knew pretty quickly there was definitely a werewolf angle going on here. Now, you've got the imagery of the coyote/wolf head on the wall. That was a giveaway. At some point, she finds some bullets in there, and I can assume they're silver bullets. And then eventually, you hear he essentially starts saying, like, you're bit. There's this whole thing about her being bit or being infected. They call it infected at first, so you'd maybe not believe she's a werewolf. She's supposed to be a werewolf. But if you know anything about werewolves, you're okay, she's a werewolf or a zombie, one of those two things, and you're leaning towards werewolf as it goes on. Not to mention she's in a silver stream. That's a silver bullet. You find some silver bullets. There's a wolf head on the wall. There's like a lot of indications that might be what's going on. And then, of course, you hear him eventually it switches to the cab of the truck, and he's on this coast-to-coast AM sort of show. He seems to be a frequent caller. He calls in to the host, and he says, I've got one. I got a weir. You're like, oh, no, it's a werewolf. That's what he's got. He thinks... Now, the one credit of this movie, and this part of the movie, is for a whole bunch of the movie, I would say until the very last act, there's still a question on whether that is what's going on with her. You know it probably is because it's a horror movie, but it could be just him being a crazy conspiracy theorist guy, and he's essentially just abducted a woman, and he thinks that she's a werewolf, and she's not. And she thinks that about herself. She thinks he's exactly that. She thinks he's a crazy abducting, I don't know, killer or whatever, and that he's just believes she's a werewolf, and she's in danger because of that. So it works on that level, and I do really appreciate when he calls into the radio station. There's an extended section where he's going back and forth to the radio station. They're putting him on ad break. They're talking to him off the air, and you can tell the host is like, oh boy, we have crazy people calling every night. We don't really believe this stuff, and now we've got somebody who's basically kidnapped a woman because he believes in werewolves. What are we going to do? That kind of thing. And that was really good too. That was all good. Like I said, the only thing I don't really appreciate as much in the final act is there's a whole element where they try to basically a cop shows up, and you find out that the cop is trying to kill werewolves as well, and he knows that she's a werewolf, and he finds out that the driver of the truck got bit by her at some point when they struggle. So now he's going to try to kill everybody, this cop is. And that whole thing didn't work for me. It muddied up the end a little bit, where I just wanted it to stay 100% with just our main with Clive and Lena. And then there's the element where you find out she'd been pregnant. So, of course, you're thinking the whole time, oh my gosh, she's pregnant and she's been bitten by a werewolf. So what does that mean for her baby? That kind of thing. You've had similar things with zombies in other movies before. The Dawn of the Dead remake had that in there. So there's this final thing at the end where Well, first of all, the room in the back of the trailer is where Clive keeps his daughter. His daughter has been a werewolf for a while. He's been keeping her safe during her werewolf periods, and that locked room is to keep others safe from her and her safe from herself until she turns back. So that's one thing we discover. And at the end of this movie, of course, there's a scene where Lena gives birth to the baby, even though it's very early. Maybe everything goes faster because it's a werewolf. They don't really 100% explain that. And then we have a scene where she's holding the puppet werewolf baby, and it's, making werewolf sounds. And it's supposed to probably be horrifying or, mind-blowing, but it's a little goofy. It's a little funny. But I do appreciate puppets. I'll always take a puppet over CGI any day of the week. So I can't really knock it for that. I just, if it didn't really fit the really serious tone for this sort of movie to have a very serious and very grounded tone, the goofiness and weirdness of a werewolf baby puppet, it had to be that all the way along for me to take that into account. But whatever, I didn't mind too much. And then, of course, the final thing is that the idea is that basically she's going to be living the rest of her life and teaming up maybe with his daughter. And then there's a last moment. He got shot earlier on there too, and you get the feeling he basically is going to die. But because he got bit by a werewolf, there's a last sound that you hear that makes you think, oh, nope, he's alive. He's a werewolf too. So you can hear from what I'm saying is there's a lot of rushed ideas at the end of this movie that, to me, undercut the whole dramatic arc of the movie. Like, it wanted to become something a little bit bigger and more complicated at the end than it was for the first 2/3. And I just don't think it needed to do that, and I don't think it quite was able to pull that off. It's almost like stuff that could have been in a second movie, but maybe they're thinking, like, hey, this is our one shot. We better shoot everything at the screen as we can. That being said, a pretty cool little indie horror movie, and a great proof of concept and proof of director for this director. Once again, Brock Bodell. Yeah, I think this person could do some really interesting horror movies with a little more budget, a little more script, a little more time. You could see some really cool stuff coming out of this person. So worth checking out, especially if you have, I think it's, like I said, I think Shudder's going to get this. Cats, you could do a lot worse than this little movie. It's good.